an age when most young men are still dependent upon parental benevolence. He had left Oxford without a degree, but with a reputation for considerable talent of an artistic, social, and generally intangible character. He had travelled and amused himself for half a dozen years, enjoying independence, health, and high spirits to the uttermost. He had had his adventures, his disillusions, and his disappointments during that long holiday; and he had only sobered and settled down on marrying one of the prettiest girls of her season, a girl fresh from a Buckinghamshire valley, where her people had been lords of the soil before the Wars of the Roses. She had practically no money, but she came of a race which claimed kindred with Hampton. She had the calm and chaste beauty of the Florentine Venus; she neither flirted nor talked slang; and she knew no more about racing or cards than if she had still been in the nursery. In a word, she was a girl whom Wordsworth or Milton would have accepted as the fairest type of English girlhood, and Robert Hatrell considered himself very lucky in winning her for his wife. His father had been a civil engineer, a genius, successful in all he touched. The rewards of his profession had been large and rapid, and had tempted him to overwork, which resulted eventually, after many notes of warning, in an appallingly sudden death. Robert inherited with the engineer's fortune the engineer's ardent temperament, which on his part showed itself in superfluous energy, a feverish activity about trifles. There were times when, in spite of fortune, happy home, and idolized wife, he felt that he had made a mistake in his life, that it would have been better for him to have worked hard and had a career like his father's. He read of the two Brunels and the two Stevensons with a pang of regret. But on this bright April morning there was no shadow upon Robert Hatrell's happiness, no sense of a purpose and a career missed, a life in some wise wasted. He talked of the additional land as if it were the beginning and end of existence. "It will just make the place perfect, Clara," he said. "You are always right, love. We were terribly cramped when we made our garden. The river terrace is well enough, but we have no depth. The grounds are unworthy of the house." He opened a glass door and went out upon the lawn, his wife following him. They stood side by side, and looked first at the house, and then at the garden, this way and that, and then at the river. 11 years ago, on the eve of their marriage, he and Clara, riding together one morning on the Berkshire side of the river, between Reading and Henley, had discovered an old-fashioned cottage in a good-sized garden, with a lawn sloping to the river. There were a couple of meadows and an orchard behind the cottage, divided from it by a road, but the best part of the whole thing was this river frontage of less than a quarter of a mile. The cottage was to be let or sold, as a lopsided board announced to the world at large; and the neglected garden gave evidence that it was a long time since the last tenant had departed and left the place to gradual decay. The lovers dismounted, found a door on the latch, and explored the house, which was empty of human life, albeit some shabby furniture and a sandy cat in the kitchen indicated that a caretaker had her habitation on the premises. The thick walls, leaded casements, quaint old staircase, and corridor fascinated Clara. She was passionately fond of the river and of the country in which she had been born and reared. Her future home was to be in Chester Street, Belgravia; but the exploration of the cottage suggested a delightful alternative. "How sweet it would be to have this for a summer home, Rob," she said; and Robert, who was at the period of his most abject slavery, instantly decided that the cottage must be hers. The negotiation of the purchase gave him something to do. Alterations and additions and improvements would make a delightful occupation for husband and wife after the honeymoon. The house in Chester Street had been taken on a 7, 14, or 21 years' lease, a most commonplace business. It was furnished and ready for them. Nothing more to do there. But this cottage would afford endless work. He began to plan at once, even before he knew the owner's name. Of course they must build a drawing room and dining room, and a couple of bedrooms, boudoir, and dressing room on the floor above. The present sitting room would make a pretty hall by knocking down a lath and plaster partition and throwing in the passage. Those thick walls and great chestnut beams were delightful. He saw his way to an artistic-looking house for very little money. "I am nothing if not inventive," he said. "Remember what my father did. Some faint trickle from that deep stream of intellectual force ought to have come down to me." "I'm sure you would be quite as clever as your father, and would plan viaducts and things as he did."